Russia has warned that it's ready to sever ties with the European Union if the bloc hits Moscow with new economic sanctions. The EU reportedly plans to impose travel bans and asset freezes on allies of the Russian president in response to the last week expulsion of German, Polish, and Swedish diplomats from Moscow. Tensions have risen recently over the arrest of Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny. Moscow says the West is exploiting Navalny's case for political reasons. The latest differences between Moscow and the EU could put pressure on the Nord Stream 2 natural gas pipeline being built from Russia to Germany. The United States has also imposed sanctions on companies working on the project. Once completed, Nord Stream 2 would double the flow of energy resources between Russia and Germany.
Russia and the EU have remained at odds over a host of issues for years. Tensions, however, between the two have escalated recently over the alleged poisoning of Russian opposition figure Alexei Navalny and his ensuing imprisonment for violating a parole. Navalny's arrest upon his return from Germany sparked angry reactions in Europe and at home, with thousands of his supporters taking to the streets across Russia. Moscow slammed the rallies as illegal and expelled 3 European diplomats for attending the rallies. Russia says Navalny's case is an internal affair and that it won't allow any foreign interference in it. However, Russia's move prompted tit-for-tat expulsions from Germany, Poland and Sweden. And the EU foreign policy chief has called for a new round of sanctions on Russia.
First, we will discuss this issue at the Foreign Affairs Council the next 22nd of February, at the European Union Council in March. This will provide guidance on the way forward, and it will be for the member states to decide the next step. But yes, this could include sanctions.
Russia has reacted strongly to the EU's call, saying it is ready to sever ties with the bloc if it goes ahead with its economic sanctions plan. The Kremlin says it doesn't want to isolate itself, but it has to be ready for the worst-case scenario.
We assume that we are ready to sever ties in case we see again, as we have felt more already, that sanctions create risks for our economy are imposed in most vulnerable areas. Yes, if you want peace, prepare for war.
The Navalny case is just the tip of the iceberg in sinking relations between Moscow and Brussels. Among other things, they have been widely at odds over Russia's support for anti-government forces in eastern Ukraine and reunification of the strategic Black Sea peninsula of Crimea with Russia. Several European countries and the United States have accused Russia of blocking any solution to the conflict in eastern Ukraine. Russia, however, blames Ukraine for failing to implement the 2015 Minsk agreement that was aimed at putting an end to the conflict. It seems that a current diplomatic spat could be counterproductive for both Russia and Europe, as the two need each other for trade, particularly natural gas. Moscow is building a new pipeline that would bring gas to several European countries, undercutting Ukraine as a transit country. As expected, the US is opposed to the project, claiming it will increase the bloc's energy reliance on Russia. Washington has imposed several rounds of sanctions on the companies involved in the construction of the project. Germany, which has always resisted a direct confrontation with Russia, has fought hard to keep the pipeline going, saying it is a commercial, not a political issue. Despite increasing tensions between the EU and Russia, many European leaders have already signaled they are not quite interested to see a deepening of a standoff with Moscow. It remains to be seen if tensions could spiral out of control as the new US administration and some of its European allies seem hell-bent on declaring Russia as a major challenge.
Well, joining us on tonight's debate, we have historian, journalist, and author Dr. Marcus Papadopoulos, who's with us from the British capital, London. Also, we have research fellow at American University in Moscow, Gilbert Doctorow, joining us from Brussels. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Let's start off with Dr. Papadopoulos. Strong words from the Russian foreign minister, who says that Moscow should be prepared for the worst. Now, just recently, Sergei Lavrov said that the EU is not a reliable partner, at least at the current stage. Where is this heading? In your opinion, is this a new low for Russia-EU ties?
Well, when Britain departed from the European Union, there was a chance, albeit a slim one, that relations between the EU and Russia could improve. Why? Because when Britain had been a member of the EU, the British had constantly pressurized Germany and France, which are the engines of the European Union, to adopt a severe stance on Russia. In plain terms, we can say that when Britain had been a member of the European Union, the British were lobbying very hard on behalf of American objectives in the EU. Now, since Britain has left the EU, the decisions of the European Union vis-à-vis Russia have hardly been conducive to improving relations between Brussels and Moscow. And indeed, the focal point at the moment concerns the EU's stance, completely unreasonable, unsubstantiated stance on Alexei Navalny. Now, we have to ask, why is that? The European Union, as it stands today, is at its most fragile, politically and economically, and it is certainly not in the interests of the overwhelming majority of EU member states, with the notable exception, of course, of Poland and the Baltic states, for relations between the economic bloc and the Russian Federation to deteriorate even further. However, it certainly is in the interests of the Americans and the British for relations between the EU and Russia to deteriorate even further. Ultimately, the European Union is a strategic ally to America. The European Union coordinates its foreign policy and its defense policy with America, so much so that we can argue persuasively that America is the outside dominant force in the European Union. So it is, in my estimation, that the Americans and the British have exploited the incident concerning Alexei Navalny to bring about a further worsening of relations between the European Union and Russia, because Washington and London do not want an improvement in relations between the EU and Russia.
Right. Let's cross over to Brussels now, Mr. Doug Taro. Last week, EU Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell said that his meeting with the Foreign Minister Lavrov highlighted that Europe and Russia are drifting apart, and that it seems that Russia is progressively disconnecting itself from Europe. Do you think that there's any place for constructive dialogue at the current moment right now?
I think what's needed is shock therapy, and this is exactly what Lavrov's words were meant to do yesterday. Just let's keep in mind that Mr. Lavrov is a very capable and very seasoned diplomat of global level. At the same time, the direction of his actions, the directions of his words, are given by Mr. Putin. And behind his remarks about preparing for war, if you want to have peace, we can see very clearly the thinking and the direction of Vladimir Putin. The point here is that Russia and the EU have been drifting apart for the last 10 years. Going back to 2012, when the European Union declined to renew its overall cooperation and strategic partnership with Russia, there has been a downward movement. It's lurched at various points. Of course, the 2014 events in Crimea and the Ukrainian civil war were one important turning point, or I should say lurch backwards in the relationship. But there have been others. The Skripal poisoning was one, the MH17 was one, and they all have something in common. And that something in common, and here's where I differ a bit with the previous speaker, is a script written in Washington. If the UK has been the voice of skepticism, if not hostility to Russia within the EU, that was all acting in a nod and a wink with what it was receiving by way of recommendations from Washington. The Poland and the Baltic states are the cat's paw of the United States within the EU, and they are effective precisely because the way it is structured today, the EU cannot have a foreign policy that is worth anything. Everything must be based on consensus. Any naysayer can destroy that consensus and deprive the EU of a policy. We are in a situation where these Baltic states and Poland are depriving the major powers in Europe of logical, reasonable relations with Russia. At the same time, Mrs. Merkel is not an innocent bystander in this. Germany has had its own very clear interests as a major power in Mitteleuropa, where German industry is heavily installed ever since these countries became free of the East Bloc. And Germany is in a love affair with these countries and does not find it very simpatico, very easy to deal with Russia. Russia is too big, Russia is too strong. And so it is very easy for Mrs. Merkel and her party and Germany to stand aside and let the Poles and the Baltics do all the nasty words about Russia and appear to be calm and reasonable. Germany is not being calm and reasonable. Its present policy of encouraging Mr. Navalny, of giving him all support when he made his fake news video during his stay in Germany, this is not the act of a friendly power or even a neutral power. It's the act of a hostile power.
Okay.
So Germany has also become an active contributor to the deterioration in relations with Russia.
Back to London, Dr. Papadopoulos. Following the expulsion of the 3 European diplomats, the EU has hinted at imposing new sanctions against Moscow. Of course, that's a decision that needs to be approved by European governments. How do you view that approach from Brussels?
Well, I believe that threat from the European Union actually originates in Washington, because as I said moments ago, the European Union, even before what is known as COVID-19, was in a economically precarious condition. And relations with Russia, trade relations, investment relations, are very important to the European Union. It is simply not conducive to the economic well-being of the European Union for there to be EU sanctions on Russia, which stem from 2014, when the European Union, in tandem with America and Britain, initiated and implemented a coup against the then Ukrainian president, Viktor Yanukovych. And as a result of the EU sanctions on the Russian Federation, many jobs and companies in the European Union, for example, in Spain and Italy and Greece, have been seriously jeopardized because they're no longer able to export to the European Union. So if we speed forward to 2021, how on earth is it in the interest for ordinary people, ordinary companies in the European Union, for the EU to place further sanctions on Russia? Because that will mean that agricultural companies in the EU will be even more impeded in their ability to export to the European Union. So that is why my submission is that behind the EU's threats stands America and also Britain. Of course, Poland and the Baltic states are enjoying the deterioration in relations between Brussels and Moscow because the Baltic states and Poland are vehemently anti-Russian and are doing all within their means to act as a conduit for Western aggression against Russia. Let us not forget that last summer, when the West attempted to engineer a coup in Belarus, or Belarus, as it is officially known as, Poland and the Baltic states acted as the logistical countries in that attempted coup. So the European Union is not truly an independent or sovereign economic bloc. Ultimately, it bends to the will of the Americans.
Same question to Gilbert Dogtaro. Have European sanctions been working on Russia?
Well, let's be very clear, because this has not come out in the discussion till now. Mr. Lavrov's statement was explicit. He was not speaking about just any sanctions. He was speaking about sanctions that threaten the vital economic interests of Russia. And what does that mean? We don't have to guess. There are two sanctions which could threaten the economic well-being of Russia, and they are first pulling the plug on SWIFT, kicking Russia out of SWIFT, the International Settlement Organization for financial transactions, and the second is putting a halt, if not permanently stopping the Nord Stream 2 project. The Nord Stream 2 project is the lesser of these two threats to Russia, but it's also very significant. And I'd like to make a small correction to the remarks at the introduction to this program. The Nord Stream 2 pipeline is not going to give additional gas to Europe. It will replace pipelines which have been through Ukraine, which are a means for the United States to threaten European gas supplies and Russian ability to deliver gas at any moment. So it is providing the Nord Stream 2 would provide a reliable transit of gas to Europe. But coming back to SWIFT, that would be a deadly threat to the Russian economy. And in Iran, you certainly know what this means. Unlike Iran, which did not have the capability of doing damage to those who are imposing the sanctions on it, since petroleum is not as vital or as limited in its supply and in its transport as gas is, Iran did not have a leverage that the Russians have. If the Europe were to implement what was called 2 years ago the nuclear option, that is, throwing Russia out of SWIFT and doing vast damage to the Russian economy, the Russians could do vast damage to the European economy on 2 minutes' notice by stopping the shipment of all gas to Western Europe. If they did that in the middle of Europe, in the middle of the European winter, then all hell would break loose here. So I think that by speaking as he did yesterday about cutting relations, what exactly does that mean? Does it just mean throwing out diplomats, or does it mean really cutting relations? Gas is the single most important element in European-Russian relations, and it would be entirely logical that the Russians would have their finger on that button if the SWIFT cutoff were to come to the fore in the European Parliament.
Dr. Papadopoulos, we're talking about the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline. Despite the souring of ties with the Kremlin, Germany is going ahead with the Nord Stream 2 project. On the issue, the German president, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, said, quote, "Energy ties are almost the last bridge between Russia and Europe." The foreign minister, German foreign minister Heiko Maas, also said we must not burn all bridges with Russia. Supporters of this pipeline say that it's an economic project, not a political one, and it shouldn't be used as leverage. What is your perspective on the issue?
Indeed. And therein lies the reason, the ultimate reason as to why a severing in economic relations between the European Union and the Russian Federation is highly unlikely. On the other hand, a severing in political relations between Brussels and Moscow is possible, but I believe it is inconceivable that there would be a severing in relations between an economic severing in relations between the European Union and Russia. Why? Because Russia needs the European market, and in particular the German market, to export its natural gas to. That is absolutely critical to the Russian economy. And likewise, the vast majority of the European Union's natural gas comes from Russia. And when it comes to Germany, Germany is heavily dependent on the Russian Federation for natural gas. If Russia turned off its gas supply to the European Union, then the European economy and the German economy in particular would almost collapse overnight. And how would ordinary Germans and Europeans be able to survive the autumn and winter months? How would they be able to keep warm in their homes when there is no longer Russian natural gas coming into the European Union? So Sergei Lavrov, who is not a member of Putin's inner circle, he is a messenger, albeit a very capable one, has issued an exceptionally stern warning to the European Union to refrain from issuing those two sanctions on Russia. And I believe that the Europeans and ultimately the Americans understand that if Russia did go ahead and sever all relations, political, but most important of all, economic, then the European Union would simply collapse. Where would Europe receive its gas from? How would European industry be able to function without Russian natural gas? So it is not in the interest for Russia to sever economic relations, and likewise, it is not in the interest for the European Union to no longer be in receipt of Russian natural gas.
Mr. Doktorov, following up on what our guest in London just said, is Germany basically making Europe more dependent on Russia?
Well, as I said, it's confusing the issue to speak about Nord Stream 2 as raising Russian supplies of gas to Europe. It's raising Russian supplies of gas directly to Germany. That's correct. But it does not change the balance of Russia's contribution to the Europe-wide energy situation. It is simply removing Russian gas, or half of Russian gas supplied to Europe, from the fragile, politically vulnerable pipelines through Ukraine. It is in the interests of Russia to continue this, and the only purpose of Lavrov's warning was to remind them that Russia is not an insignificant country, is a major power, and must be treated with respect. It also was a reminder that the Russians take a very dim view of the whole Navalny promotion coming out of Europe. I think that we have to remember that within Russia's power structures, within Russia's political elites, and not just Mr. Putin and his narrow circle, but within the whole Russian power structure, there is a feeling of relief that Mr. Navalny finally has been treated as he should have been treated 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay.
There's the feeling that in trying to appear reasonable and civilized and decent and law and respecting human rights, the Kremlin has given the wrong signals to the West.
All right, I'm going to have to jump in there.
Confused.
Apologies, sir, we're running short of time. Thanks to my guest, historian, journalist, and author, Dr. Marcus Papadopoulos, joining us from London. Also thanks to research fellow at American University in Moscow, Mr. Gilbert Doktorov, joining us from Brussels. Also, special thanks to you, our guests, for joining us on tonight's debate. It's goodbye for now, and see you next time.